Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people that I've connected with over the years in the entertainment business. And today, I'm glad to have returning to the show a man who wears many hats in the business, Mr. Jaimie Vernon. Welcome back, Jaimie.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yes, you are. So we had a lot of fun last time doing a little bit of a pop music rock and roll trivia game. And are you ready to spin the wheel again, Jaimie?
Yeah, you can break my brain a second time. So.
Okay, well, I don't think I've got anybody here that is absolutely going to stump you today. But,
right. Star Child was the one that got me last time, so.
Yeah, I barely remembered them anyway, but I just thought, yeah, we'll see, because I thought maybe you'd have a little bit more information than I did. But let's start with maybe something that's not so tricky. How about, what do you know about the band Moxy?
Moxy, well, that was the late Buzz Sherman fronted that band with guitarists Earl Johnson and Buddy Caine, and Bill Wade and Terry Jerk were the rhythm section. And they were hot rocking right out of the gate. 73, 74 was the start for them, and they came out of Toronto and just kind of lit the clubs on fire here. It just predated Gatto by a little bit, and they were a straight-up rock band, but really heavy guitars and stuff. The Americans took to them right away, and in fact, they ended up touring down in Texas over and over and over again. It was kind of their second home. They really couldn't spread out into the rest of the United States, but radio gravitated to them in Texas. So every time there was a big festival or something down there, they got the call to headline, and in fact, AC/DC opened for them. For the first time in 75 down there. They put out several really good albums. Tommy Bolin was brought in for the second record to add guitar solos to it, which was a kind of neat addition. And then, unfortunately, I guess they lost their deal with Polygram later in the 70s, and the band was kind of not really doing anything. So Buzz Sherman, the singer, was off, looking to do some solo stuff. And unfortunately, he died in a tragic motorcycle accident going up the Highway 400 here in Toronto. And, the band was devastated. And, the 80s, they kind of lost the 80s, but come the 90s, they decided to reform, and they brought in the rhythm section this time from Zon. So it was Jim and Kim Hunt from Zon doing rhythm, well, basically bass and drums. And they brought in Brian Maxim from a Rolling Stone tribute band in Toronto here to do the lead vocals. And they managed to put out 2 albums, one of which was on my record label. They did Moxy 5 with Pacemaker Records, and then they did the Raw album, which was basically a re-recording of their greatest hits on my label called Raw. And then sadly, and this is a tragic story for these guys, is that Brian passed away from cancer. They brought Alex Macon in from A Foot in Cold Water to do lead vocals. But the band was having a hard time in the 2000s, just kind of keeping gigs. Classic rock wasn't what it was. It kind of started to peter out, so they were having a hard time keeping the whole thing together.
And it's sad, really, how many veterans out there are still trying to hang on to the same old thing. And, there's a lot of people that want to hear it, but I don't think there's that many people who want to buy it anymore.
Yeah. Well, the biggest issue had more to do with the clubs and the places to play. I mean, it was really hard to book them. When Moxy was on my label, it was great because we created a triple bill tour with Moxy, Santers, and Gatto. So it was phenomenal. I mean, all the fans of that type of Canadian classic rock were coming out in droves. So it was a beautiful thing. But as the decade wore on, Moxy was having a hard time keeping it together in terms of getting more gigs. Now, they did play Texas a few times, and they celebrated their 40th anniversary. But since Alex Macon, they've had 2 more lead vocalists. They had Russell Graham from the Killer Dwarfs briefly, and then the final vocalist and the one who's been with them still constantly for the last decade has, Jesus, suddenly his name popped out of my head. Sorry, Nick Walsh from Slick Toxic.
Okay. How many times can your phoenix rise again, right? So.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, at this stage of the existence of Moxy, Earl Johnson's the only original member left. Everybody else has gone away or passed away, unfortunately. So, but, the band had a really great run, and there's still a huge fan base out there all over the world, and their albums hold up. That type of straight-up rock didn't quite get the airplay that you would have seen from an AC/DC. And this is my biggest complaint was that Canadian radio didn't offer them the same opportunities they did for, international acts playing the exact same kind of music.
Well, there's one thing to say about straight up rock and roll. It is timeless. When you start to add a whole bunch of fluff around it, that's when, you might get into it for the moment, but then 20 years later you're going, wow, I can't believe I listened to that crazy synth pop thing that was happening on this rock band. So how about we move on to, are you familiar with Scrubbaloe Caine?
Yes. Funny enough, Paul Dean, who would have ended up in Loverboy, was in Scrubbaloe Caine. And Scrubbaloe was a mixture of a bunch of guys from out west, including Henry Small. Now, Henry Small was in a band called Small Wonder, and he ended up the lead vocalist for Prism after Ron Tabak died. But Scrubbaloe Caine put out one album called Round One, and there should have been more albums, but the record label that they were signed to was out of New York called Amherst Records, and they didn't quite get the second one happening. And Paul moved on. Paul moved on to Loverboy.
And Paul and Henry, I think, still have a pretty tight connection because
for sure.
I spoke to Henry on the show a while ago, and he credits Paul Dean for hooking him up with Burton Cummings' band and Prism, actually. So
yeah.
That's cool that they still have that friendship.
And it's funny, and this is what a lot of people don't know, is Paul Dean's been making music on record since around 1966. He was in a band called The Fox, and The Fox became a band called Canada. Canada. It was just straight up Canada, and they got signed to RCA. And that led to Paul's ability to negotiate with RCA for Scrubbaloe Caine, which was early 70s. So he'd already been in 2 recording acts prior to Scrubbaloe Caine. And then, of course, we cashed in big time at the end of the 70s with Loverboy.
Yeah, it's the usual overnight sensation that takes 20, 30 years, right?
Oh, yeah, this is what people don't understand. And, the Canadian music community, technically, it's bigger now, but back then it was postage stamp sized. I mean, everybody was connected in some way or the other. And there were so many artists that kind of made their way through different bands all through Canadian history. When you get to a band like April Wine, and you've got so many different band members, and they all came from other bands as well,
Yeah, it used to be quite the community, and a lot of times when I talk to some of the classic guys like Ronnie King or like even a Frank Soda, and they start rhyming off all their pals, and they're all from bands spread right across Canada. Everybody knows Al Harlow, and everybody knows this guy or that gal, So it used to be quite the community. How about this one, Copper Penny?
Copper Penny, yeah, from out your way.
Yeah, Kitchener. Yeah.
Yeah, Rich Wummel and those guys. And it's funny enough, they got their name. They took their name from a B-side of a single by the Poppers, one of Skip Prokop's old bands. And they were signed to a small label called Sweet Plum. And the problem was Sweet Plum didn't kind of have the promotional material or the ability with cash to kind of push those guys because they were a really great band. They had distribution through London Records, which was a great, was a fairly big multinational, but I think they got shortchanged. They had some really great records. Yeah,
I still remember Sitting on a Poor Man's Throne.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is funny because it was a soul tune. That was the best part about that tune. It was a neat soul tune. And you think about the band and it's like, well, no, the way that they were organized and the way they looked on stage, they were very flashy. There was almost a glam look to them.
Yeah, I saw them in concert. I don't know who they were opening. Maybe they were opening for the Stampeders or possibly April Wine back in the day. And one of the things that blew my mind is they did a cover of Deep Purple's Burn. And the guitar player just ripped into it. And I thought, wow. Because like you say, their biggest hit was a soul tune, right?
Yeah, and they had another ballad called You're Still the One, which always gets overlooked because everybody kind of gravitates to the soul song, but You're Still the One is a good one to check out if you can find it. I mean, Kenny Hollis was in that band, and he was basically the guy that ran the Lulu's house band for years and years and years. He was the MC and stuff there. And, he was in a lot of acts after Copper Penny as well.
Right. I think I met him. We played at Lulu's one time, and I'm pretty sure he was there at the time. How about Wide Mouth Mason?
Wide Mouth Mason, guys from out in the prairies. It's really tough for prairie acts to actually get any traction, I think. But Widemouth Mason is great. They were a trio, and they did this kind of neat funk thing before, not quite the Red Hot Chili Peppers type stuff, because it wasn't rock. It was a lot more 70s soul as well. Here we go back to the soul kind of stuff. They were from Saskatoon, and the only other real Saskatchewan acts were the Northern Pikes, Colin James. But in the 90s, we got Widemouth Mason, and another one that, they were around for quite some time and put out some great albums. The music industry just kind of left them alone and let them do their thing, and they built this massive following. There's actually a documentary on YouTube you can check out about them, because they reunited a couple of years ago with 2 of the 3 members, and they put out another new album, and the stuff's just consistent. They're a lot more like the Maroon 5s and the Matchbox 20s and that kind of thing. I'm not sure that Canada was digging that kind of music at the time. I mean, when everybody was gravitating towards the Tragically Hip, or the Watchmen, which were a lot more gritty, a lot more jangly guitars. Widemouth Mason was really clean. They had great, clean, soulful production sound and everything, and I like them a lot.
Yeah, they really had a distinctive sound. Like you say, it was very clean, but that voice made all the difference, that's for sure.
Oh, for sure.
Why don't we try Harlequin?
Harlequin. Innocence.
Yeah.
Oh, man, it makes me want to sing right away. It's funny enough, they had a really short run, another band from out west, which is great. We're dealing with a lot of bands from out west and stuff. But Georges Boulanger, what a phenomenal voice he had. They put out a bunch of tunes they were signed to Sony Records. I think they got treated really well, and they got a lot of radio play. And it's funny because that's come around full circle now. I think from what I can tell, they're getting a lot more airplay now than they were granted back in the day. They were just another top 40 act at the time, but they had a hard edge. So they were doing shows with a lot of other rock bands from Toronto and stuff like that. So I'm not sure whether they have the same kind of fan base out west that they have here in Eastern Canada. I think they did really, really well here.
I know that they were touring in recent years. They were touring like the casinos and whatnot in Ontario.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, the bass player was Ralph James, and of course, Ralph left Harlequin to become an agent for the agency. So he's the guy that's running around out there scouting talent.
Right, yeah. Well, here's one that's kind of near and dear to my heart, Thundermug.
Thundermug. Oh, Africa. What a great song. Bill Durst, one of the great blues guitar players from Canada, just an unbelievable talent. I've seen him play quite a few times, and his solo records are just great. They were on Axe Records. They put out a couple albums in the mid-'70s, but they, just underappreciated because they did Africa, which was this kind of tribal rock song. I kind of put them in the same category as the Stampeders, like with Wild Eyes and stuff, where they were a rock band that was kind of blues-based, and they had this, these weird syncopated tunes and stuff, and I don't know that they, because they were signed to a small indie like Axe Records, they really didn't get the exposure that they needed. I think people need to check it out. Axe has reissued the 3 albums that they did, but they reunited in the 90s, and I like that stuff as well. Who's Running My World was a great record from 94.
Jim Corbett was on that, on bass, and Bill Durst on guitar, but they had Corey Thompson on drums. Yeah, that was Bill Durst and Jim Corbett with young Corey Thompson on. Ed Pranskus was the original drummer, and he's the one that gets all the street cred for his incredible fill in Africa. And,
right.
It's funny because Ed has been my go-to drummer, especially for studio stuff, since 2014.
Oh, yeah, he's a monster.
Well, we recorded the Only Human album, and I know you're familiar with that because you and I had worked something out for a distribution thing on that. But when we were in the studio, I said, and the engineer and I both looked at Ed and said, man, you got to hit those drums really hard because you're an amazing player, but people want to hear that thunderous drumming that you did in Thundermug. And so apparently he played the fill from Africa 2 or 3 times on my record. So,
oh, wow. Yeah. That's funny.
It is, yeah. But they're all still doing really well. And here's an interesting thing. Joe DeAngelis and Bill Durst were touring across the country together right up until about 2 years ago, maybe within 6 months actually of the first shutdown.
Oh, wow.
Joe had to go in for some extensive back surgery, so he was unable to perform on stage, and I guess they had a bit of a dust-up, but now here's the good news, is that Joe and Bill are back writing again.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
On that, what do you know about, as you call, evergreen acts that have got new things coming out?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny, Sherry Ulrich, she was in a folk trio called UHF with Bill Henderson and Roy Forbes. And she's been doing solo stuff again now from her home out in Killarney Lake, out in British Columbia. And she's been releasing new videos from an album that she released over a year ago, I guess. And she's kind of come back to my attention. I think people that like real classical folk music, as we heard in the 60s and 70s, might want to check her stuff out on YouTube, or even get the album that she put out or the previous ones. You know, she's been recording for about 40 years now, which is great, and she's still got a phenomenal voice.
Now, wasn't she part of Valdi's touring band?
Yes, yeah, hometown band. That's right.
Right, Valdi and the hometown band.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing is, Miles Goodwin has a new one out yet. I haven't really checked it out. It's a ballad called "The Last Voice I Hear Will Be an Angel," and I think he wrote it about his grandkids. But that's coming out for a new album. 12 songs coming out in the summer called Long Pants. That's going to be the new album.
This is Miles Goodwin from April
Wine.
Yeah,
from April Wine.
Okay, cool. And I know that, speaking of April Wine, I know David Henman is constantly working on stuff from...
Yeah, I haven't heard much from David in a long time. I don't know what he's up to these days.
Yeah, apparently just recording and fighting over politics on Facebook.
Yes, well... Him and I do see eye to eye. I kind of agree with a lot of stuff he says, but and I love him to death. I mean, him and I have actually played together over time. He used to have a jam session north of Richmond Hill, actually Aurora, Ontario, and used to go out and do that. And just one of the most pro guys ever. And he's a nice guy to sit in a room with and have a chat with. And he's not all hyped up on ego or anything. I mean, the guy wrote "Drop Your Guns" for April Wine and left the band on the height of the hit. So it was like he's not driven by the fact that he's got a hit song and he needs to keep driving that wagon. He just realized that, and this happens with a lot of artists over time. Yeah. These guys just decide, you know what, this isn't the kind of music I want to play. I want to do something else. And it wasn't so much we had musical differences. It's just that he had one idea of where he wanted his career to go, and it wasn't going to be part of April Wine's career. And I respect that. It's like, you know what, you stepped out and you show that you can write songs and everything, and now you're on your own path. And good to him. I actually released a Mother's Day single probably about 10 years ago that he wrote for moms, and it was a beautiful song. And it's like, I wish he'd do more.
Yeah, well, he contributed to my cover of his song "Drop Your Guns."
Drop Your Guns, that's right.
And he played almost all the guitars on it. And he actually came down to London with his wife. And the last show that we played was over a year ago, February of 2020, for Rockin' for Kids. And he and his wife came out and he played probably half a dozen songs with us. So that was pretty cool. But here's the best part, as far as an ironic twist, is that David Henman came up with the name April Wine, and he just graciously gave it away.
Yeah.
Now Miles Goodwin has had a career for how many, 40 years or more?
Oh, yeah.
Riding on that name, and he's had so many, nobody has changed band members more than Miles Goodwin. Like, he changes guys in the band more often than I change my socks.
Yeah. Actually, I'll trump that. Helix has actually changed more band members.
You're right. Yes, and
I counted. I had to update. Brian Vollmer sent me a note saying, you don't have all the latest band members in there, so I went and revised it, and I think there's been 41 members of Helix. So.
I've said many times, I think I'm the only guitar player in London that has not played in Helix. And just about every guitar player in the London and southwestern Ontario region has played in Helix, but hey.
Well, it's funny, like he's reconfigured entire bands into that, but April Wine's done the same thing. I mean, sometimes that's what you got to do when you're the leader and you've got no backing band. Alice Cooper's been doing this for decades as well. It's kind of like, okay, I've got a new album, I need a new band, and they'll just go in wholesale and find a band that already exists that has chemistry and go, can you play my songs? You know what I mean? And I get that. It's just easier than trying to format personalities of all these desperate different types of musicians that have never been in a band before. You know
that's what Mitch Field did when he was offered his record deal. They said, we love it, but we're not doing solo acts, so you need to find a band. So he just recruited a band from Thunder Bay, of all places, and that was Hellfield.
Right. This is the funniest thing about Hellfield is that, it's Mitch's name. It's Mitchell Field. So he just called it Hellfield.
That's awesome.
People didn't realize. It's like, it's Mitchell Field. So it kind of made sense. So technically it was still a solo thing, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
It was his vision, and he just had a band that backed him up. But I mean, what a band it was.
Right. And, I guess while we're kind of on the topic of evergreens with new things, Mitch does have something new on the go as well.
Yes, he keeps hinting to me, and, him and I have been talking in the background because back when I ran my Bullseye records, Hellfield was slated to actually release some live material. There was their final show at the Gasworks was recorded properly, and it sounded okay. But when we listened to it compared to other material that we were putting out, I didn't think the audio stood up. Now I listen back to it going, I should have put the thing out.
Yeah.
But now Mitch came to me a couple of weeks back, and he said, do you have that recording still? Which I do. Paul Royce, who was a guitar player in the last version of Hellfield, had sent that material to me, for me to consider back in, I don't know, I probably got the disc from him 2001, 2003, somewhere around there, and I still had it. And in fact, I'd been digitizing stuff recently, and I said, it's right here. I'll send it to you. So hopefully Mitch will get that stuff out. I love to hear what people think about the recordings. I'm, now looking back at it with 2020 hindsight, it's like I should have put it out because it was a really good recording. But, I've been dealing with bands like Gatto and Moxy who were re-recording their hits for me. So the production quality was really high level. And it's like, I don't know about putting out this, this board mix from a live club going back in time. Is there an audience for that? Meanwhile, I'd actually been working desperately with Sony Records trying to get the rights to the album and the EP that they put out. And it was all set to go, and right in the middle of those negotiations, they did let me put out the Killer Dwarfs' second album, Stand Tall. I got that off of them, and I had a whole shopping list of artists that Sony had in the vaults of Canadian acts that they weren't going to touch. Cats Can Fly, The Tenants, Hellfield, Zon. At that point, it was Zon. The Zon stuff has since come out on labels out of Europe, but at that time, I was negotiating for Zon and Hellfield, and we were ready to go with those things, and then BMG Records and Sony merged, and the whole thing was off the table. And Velma Barkwell, who was my sort of go-to agent at Sony at the time, who was great and very accommodating, she lost her job. So everything was just kind of up in the air, and that whole thing was scuttled, and unfortunately I didn't get the material out, which I regret.
That's a typical music business story to do with how the record companies and A&R people and agents work. I don't want to rush right past the Killer Dwarfs. What's their story right now?
Well, the KDs, I mean, they're still together. They're still working it. So it's Russell and the drummer Daryl. They're still out there. And there's another situation where it's a rotating lineup of guitar players and bass players. I'm still actually not very close friends, but in constant contact with Bad Rombo, who was the bass player in the 80s version of the band. I got them, and I'm actually going to tweet my own horn here, because I was in a cover band with Russell, the lead singer, and it was me. Actually, funny enough, it was my old band Moving Targets with Russell as the lead vocalist out doing cover tunes. We were called the Richmond Hillbillies, and we were doing that for quite a while. And I just kept saying to Russell, we'd get off stage in some little tiny, the Albion Hotel in Muskoka, and there'd be like 5 people in the audience, and we'd be backstage between sets. And I just said to Russell, I said, I don't know how you do this, man. You toured with Iron Maiden, and you played Wembley and all those biggest stadiums in the world, and now you're doing this. Why don't you put the Dwarfs back together, man? Like, go out on a high. Don't go out on a low. Like, I'm having fun playing this stuff with you, but I think it's beneath you, actually. I think you should be out there rocking your ass off again. I said, there's an audience for it. I don't think so, man. That ship is sailed. I'm happy doing what I do. It wasn't like he wasn't getting paid. I mean, we were a touring cover band, and we were making money, which was great. But I just thought better things of it. So over time, I wore them down. I said, look, I can get the first album from Attic Records and reissue that with bonus tracks. And here's the irony. This was 2000, I guess. This is before Velma Barkwell moved from Attic Records over to Sony. So she was my in at Attic Records too, and she got me the license for the demo tapes that they had originally submitted. That was their first album, just called The Killer Dwarfs. And I got that stuff from them. So I kind of went to Russell going, look, I got the stuff. Let's move towards doing a greatest hits or a best of or something, and I'll get the rest of the stuff from Sony Records later on. And like I said, we had this cover band, and we were doing this thing. And finally, he just came to me one day, and he said, we're going to put the band back together, man. And I was like, oh, that's phenomenal. And it turns out Daryl Miller, the drummer, had been talking. He was in a bunch of bands in L.A. at this time. So he'd been talking to a bunch of cable access and cable companies. It was Comcast down in the United States. And he had talked them into doing, at that time, what would have been a pay-per-view show. So he phoned up Russell and said, look, these guys are willing to pay us stupid money if we reunite and do a pay-per-view. And it was like, we'll do it from Vegas or do it from Toronto or whatever. And then Russell came to me and he goes, it seems to me if we're going to do this reunion, we should put something out and record the whole thing. And I said, perfect idea. I said, let's do a CD, let's do a DVD, we'll film it, because if they're going to do it for a pay-per-view, let's get the rights from them for the video and for the audio. Comcast didn't seem interested in maintaining the rights to that, so they signed off on it. So I got the rights to the CD and the video, and the band reunited. It was the 80s version of the band that everybody knew with the big hair and the stand tall guys. Anyways, so we did that. We did it at the Docks in Toronto. There was like 800 people there. We live recorded the whole thing, and we released a DVD called The Reunion of Scribes, and then they toured it. They went down to the States and across Canada and everything, so they were back on the boat again. It was great. And from there, that's when we released the second album, which had never been on CD properly. We remastered it and put it back out again, courtesy of Velma Barkwell at Sony, which was very, very nice of her.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So anyways, they kept going. We parted ways because it's a long story, but my record label ultimately seized up and collapsed over the music industry things. But the Dwarfs carried on, which was great, and they're still doing it. Once this is out of the pandemic, I'm sure they'll be back out touring again.
Well, let's hope. So what's happening now with you and the blog and etc.?
I've just finished writing the new one, and it'll be out on Monday. It's online under Don't Believe a Word I Say, which Bob Seguriti runs. And it's basically, there's 5 or 6 of us that write a column every day for him. It's kind of like Alan Cross's The Ongoing History of Canadian Music, or whatever the hell it's called. He has different writers come in and add their kind of 2 cents or perspective to things. So I've got my blog coming Monday, and it's exclusively Canadian music. And I talk about the evergreen stuff, and I talk about all the new releases coming out. We got Record Store Day coming up, which is great. There's a lot of Canadian bands that are reissuing vinyl or putting vinyl out for the first time, which is kind of nice. That's June 12th and July 17th. They're doing 2 this year. Last year there was 3 because they were trying to make up for the fact that the pandemic had all the record stores closed. So this year they've eased up and let some of the stores open for a little bit anyways before the re-lockdown. So they've got 2 record store days. I suggest people check it out, especially people who are vinyl collectors, because the record labels are issuing all these special editions on different colored vinyl and stuff with liner notes and gatefold sleeves and all that kind of stuff. It's a renaissance.
Now, is there any sort of uniformity on Record Store Day? Is that like province or Canada-wide? Or what's
It's worldwide.
Worldwide, okay.
Yeah, it's worldwide. What happens is that I don't know who runs it. I don't know that there's an organization calling it Record Store Day, but somebody's picking the dates. And then it's all kind of funneled through the major labels and stuff to see what they want to put out. And they'll go to all their different artists going, it's Record Store Day. Let's do a special edition 7-inch single with these 2 rare live tracks on it or something,
Cool.
Stompin' Tom's got some stuff coming out. It's Rarities Part 4.
Wow.
Yeah, Lost Treasures, Volume 4. So
Well,
this should be interesting.
That sounds interesting, all right. I mean,
yeah.
It's one of those weird things that when I was a kid, number one, I was influenced by the Beatles, and then it was, everything that happened after that in the world of rock and roll. But there were 2, Johnny Cash and Stompin' Tom. That used to just somehow, they'd flip a switch in me. And I was into Stompin' Tom when it wasn't cool to be into Stompin' Tom. So anyway, Jaimie, this has been great fun as usual. Is there anything in particular that you feel like you need to express right now?
Well, I mean, everybody just hang tight. I know, especially your listeners and people that I know are listening are musicians, and it's rough right now for everybody. But keep making music. Find a way to do it virtually if you can. I've just done this. I'm now working on a bunch of cover tunes. I've taught myself Band in a Box, so it at least gives me some demo background that I can work off of. And I just put out a remake of Tears for Fears' Hail Shelter as a single. It's up on Bandcamp. If you want to go to Bullseye Canada at bandcamp.com, you can check out that. In fact, reissues and remasters of stuff from the Bullseye catalog. There's all kinds of things up there. The Wild Tea and the Spirit album came out. I remastered that, put that up, which was kind of nice. Carol Pope does a guest appearance on that, so does Jeff Healy. And Tony Springer's a phenomenal guitar player, so it'd be nice to check that out. And a bunch of other stuff, all the different bands that I've been in over the years, it's all up there.
Very cool. Well, once again, Jaimie, it's been great fun. And thanks so much, and until next time, cheers. Well, I do love playing pop trivia with Jaimie Vernon. The guy is absolutely a walking encyclopedia as far as Canadian music history goes. And you've got to check out bullseyecanada.bandcamp.com, where Jaimie has some rarities and reissues of stuff from bands like Moxy and Brutus, for example. Anyway, here is Sick Day from Jaimie Vernon's band Mr. Mouret's latest project. Enjoy.
She's in a bad way, not what you can do about it. She's stuck in her own game, no one's gonna care about it. You wanna know a secret? I don't think that much about you. You wanna know a secret? I don't think
Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including producing, editing, guest acquisition, etc. All rights reserved. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends was written and recorded by Tommy Solo with a little help from my friends in the night crew. And hey, if you like the show, why not subscribe? Until next time, cheers.